There have been many Robin Hood films through the years, believe it or not, going back to 1908. That's the first one we've been able to figure out was definitely a Robin Hood production. And then there was one in 1912, which was a big deal for its time. 1913 was probably the first you could call a feature length. It was 4 reels. But the biggie was the 1922 Douglas Fairbanks Robin Hood, which really dwarfed everything else at the time. This was a silent picture, but it was top of the line, and Douglas Fairbanks at that time was one of the premier stars. He was married to Mary Pickford, obviously a premier star of her time, and she, Doug, Charlie Chaplin, and D.W. Griffith were so big in their fields that they formed United Artists because no studio could really afford to have them. So this was made for their company, United Artists, and we're going to see kind of a capsule roundup of the 1922 version, comparing it to scenes in the 1938 version and the different characters and who played them, and some of Doug's acrobatics. He was famous, of course, as an acrobatic actor. Everybody loved Doug Fairbanks in the 1920s particularly. Now this is the main title. Douglas Fairbanks in Robin Hood was actually the copyrighted title. Didn't want any rip-offs. And Story by Elton Thomas, that was Fairbanks' pseudonym. The top part of this frame is a matte painting. The bottom part is the full-scale set at the studio lot. Now here is Doug as Robin, escaping from the Nottingham Castle, and he's going to slide down a huge drape, which fortunately has a slide beneath it, which makes it possible. He's escaping from the castle. He had in his mouth a bag of gold, which was actually the ransom for Robin, but Robin Hood interceded and took it for himself. After all, he has to rob the rich to give to the poor, and he's going to go to Sherwood Forest to meet with his friends, and here they are. Will Scarlet in this version, played by Mayne Geary, and Friar Tuck in this version, played by Willard Lewis. And then we have, of course, the third member, Little John, played once again by Alan Hale. He plays Little John in the 1938 version, and he also played it for the last time in a 1950 film called Rogues of Sherwood Forest. That's a lot of mileage. Speaking of Sherwood Forest, here we are, and this is actually called Sherwood Forest by Lake Sherwood, way, way out in San Fernando Valley, and it was titled that because of the making of this movie out there. Now here's a scene that parallels the one in the 1938 version, where the men of Sherwood are leaping on Sir Guy, the Sheriff of Nottingham, and the treasure caravan. And it's a similar sequence, and of course, in that film, it's a much bigger production than in this one. Now, Doug never just mounted a horse. There were lots of flying leaps, and that was Doug, not a double. And now he's headed for the Nottingham Gate, and once again, when he gets there, he's not going to just dismount, but do a flying dismount. And that's Doug doing all these stunts because he was an acrobat. And here he is showing his archery prowess. There's no archery tournament in this version, as in the 1938, but you can see that he knows his way around. And here's a quarterstaff fight in this version with Friar Tuck and the mysterious stranger who has invaded Sherwood. Now, in the other version, the 1938, we have Little John and Robin having a quarterstaff fight on the log. But here, of course, it's a reverse situation. In fact, the man is so good that Friar Tuck thinks he might be Richard the Lionheart. Now here, Doug is going to rescue Maid Marian at the castle. And that's probably Doug doing it, but possibly when we cut back, the climb could be done by a double only because of the danger. It's not that Doug couldn't do it. Now this is all on the Pickford Fairbanks studio lot at Santa Monica Boulevard and Formosa, and it's now called The Lot, but at that time it was quite a setup because both Doug and Mary, his wife, were making pictures at the same time. In the Flynn and Rathbone final duel, we have lots of swordplay, plus the duel with Friar Tuck and Robin Hood, but in this, we're having Doug show off with a volley of people, but the main business at hand is to rescue Maid Marian, because here she is, Enid Bennett is playing her, and obviously she's in dire straits because that villainous Sir Guy, who's quite lecherous in this version, is really quite, oh, but wait a minute, Doug, with the aid of a trampoline, is going to rescue her. He's climbing up the vines, and as you know, Errol Flynn climbs up the vines to Marion's apartment in the 1938 version, but not in such a dramatic fashion. I guess she can't handle it any longer, so now there she goes. But fortunately, Robin rescues her. But he doesn't know quite the circumstances, but she says Gisborne, Guy of Gisborne. So now there's going to be a final confrontation with Sir Guy and Robin. In the Flynn version, of course, they have a final duel to the death. In this, it's a hand-to-hand combat. And of course, we know who wins. It's certainly not going to be Sir Guy. But now Robin is tied to the post, and the mysterious stranger suddenly appears. And Prince John has ordered the volley of arrows, but the mysterious stranger puts up the shield, and Prince John, who's played by Sam de Grasse in this version, and that's, of course, King Richard's brother. Now we find out that this is Richard the Lionheart, played by Wallace Beery. And here come the men of Sherwood, as in the 1938 version. They invade the castle, fight the Normans, and it looks like poor Prince John is really getting his comeuppance. He can't die because in history he doesn't. Now here we are in the wedding night with Robin and Marion, fairy tale ending, and it's a nice way to fade out.